The iPhone 11 is the perfect all-rounder phone for those who just want a device that works well without breaking the bank, being around $300 USD. But just because it's a perfect all-rounder phone doesn't mean it's a perfect phone, and for those who look for tech specs, it definitely has its drawbacks. And so with that in mind, could these downfalls be a deal breaker for you? Let's find out, starting with the design. And by the way, timestamps are in the description if you'd like to see something specific. So with the design, it's the exact same thing as the iPhone XR from the year before, but with the square camera bump instead of the single lens, and the rest is really nothing we're not used to. All-screen design with the notch, aluminium rails, glass back, it's a clean and familiar look. It is missing those flat sides that we're getting nowadays, although that's probably a good thing considering how unergonomic they are. Although because Apple wanted this phone to do as many things as possible, for as little money as possible, one of the trade-offs for that lower price point is a design that's a bit more bulky in the hand. At a weight of 194 grams, screen size of 6.1 inches, and thickness of 8.3 millimeters, it can feel unwieldy at times, but you can get used to that pretty easily. Plus, it helps the phone feel very well built and high quality. But if you're a fan of compact devices that are easy to hold, or you're coming from an older and smaller iPhone like a 7 or 8, it's going to be a huge jump in size. But again, not a deal breaker, especially if you like big phones, and because of that thicker design, you're also getting a bigger battery. Now on the front, we have our all-screen setup with the notch, which does help it feel somewhat up to date, although the bezels around the display are actually quite thick compared to the flat-sided phones, and the notch is the old larger one, so the viewing experience is ever so slightly less immersive than on more recent phones. Not that most people would care, but just a little nitpick I have. Although that notch houses the Face ID components, and as you'd expect, Face ID on here is very responsive and fast, and it works with quite a lot of angles. Plus, the phone also sports a ton of modern features like stereo speakers, wireless charging, and water resistance. All in all, it's a good design. It's something that's familiar and simple, and it really doesn't feel dated yet because of the all-screen setup. Although again, if you are into more compact devices, it can feel quite bulky. Now, you know how I mentioned before that this wasn't a perfect phone? Well, now that we're moving on to the display, it's time to address that. I mean, if you don't care about the nitty-gritty tech specs and you just want a display that shows content well, there's really nothing wrong with it. It's big with no visible pixels and great colors and viewing angles. End of story, right? Well, if you care about tech specs, probably not. It's a 6.1-inch 60Hz LCD Retina panel with a resolution of 1792 by 828, along with a pixel density of 326 pixels per inch. If those numbers mean nothing to you, then honestly, just skip ahead, because you've got nothing to worry about. However, if you're a tech spec nerd like me, then you'll know that it really leaves a lot to be desired. It's a lot less sharp than what the industry standard has been for quite some time. The resolution is only around 828p, not the standard 1080p, so you won't be able to view content in full HD, even if YouTube does give you the option to select it. Plus, while the pixel density, aka sharpness, is high enough so that you can't see individual pixels, it's nowhere near as crispy as on the vast majority of phones. In fact, it's using the exact same pixel density as on the 2010 iPhone 4. Yep, the iPhone 11 was pretty much using 9-year-old display technology, even if the iPhone 4's display was pretty ahead of its time. But pretty much every other phone out there at this price point offered much sharper displays in comparison, and panels that were OLED, not just LCD, so that you'd be getting those deep true blacks. However, my argument is that everything else about the iPhone 11 is terrific, and to keep that great value price point, they had to sacrifice something, and if that sacrifice is going to go unnoticed and uncared for by 99% of people, then that is honestly more than fair enough. And if this is the worst part about the phone, then it must be a darn good phone. After all, the iPhone 11 was made to be sort of the people's iPhone, not for those who wanted all the bells and whistles. If you did want the best display, then you had the option of buying the iPhone 11 Pro. And plus, it is also worth noting that the iPhone 12 series the following year actually fixed all these issues, finally bringing that resolution up to 1080p and bringing the OLED technology. But basically, the iPhone 11 has a good display, but not a great one. But if you really do not care about the nitty-gritty stuff, then this honestly won't be an issue. And even for those who do care, it's really not that hard to live with. I actually used to have this phone a couple of years ago, I dealt with it, and I'm still living and breathing. Now, before I say anything more that will likely turn the comments into a war zone, let's move on to the camera setup, which unlike the display, is pretty darn hard to fault at this price point. On the rear, we get a 12 megapixel main sensor, 12 megapixel ultra wide, and then on the front, a 12 megapixel selfie camera. Photos taken on the main lens can still be very impressive. The 11 series camera was a pretty big upgrade from the previous 10R and 10S cameras, and it really shows today, whether you're an avid photographer or just someone wanting to capture memories. Great stabilization, great colors, tons of detail, it's a really great all-rounder camera. One massive upgrade the 11's main camera brought though was night mode, which lets you take really clear shots in dark scenarios without without using the flash, and it's really something you'll find hard to live without once you use it, and it makes iPhones before the 11 seem significantly more dated. It's one of those features that people don't talk too much about, but it just makes the iPhone camera that much better. Now, of course, this camera isn't going to be as good as what we have today, with the most modern phones boasting ginormous lenses in comparison, but that doesn't make the 11's cameras bad in any way. They're still absolutely terrific, especially for the price point. Later iPhone cameras have just naturally improved things. Now, in addition, the iPhone 11 also brought an ultra-wide camera, which lets you capture a wider field of view. Pretty much every iPhone has it nowadays, and it's a very well-known feature by now, hence the 0.5 photo trend, and going back to older iPhones that don't have it feels kinda weird. But that being said, the ultra-wide does sacrifice a bit of the detail if you zoom in, but you know, so does the ultra-wide on the modern ones, and the overall quality is still great, just like the main lens. And finally, the selfie camera on here also does really well. There's really nothing to say except that it's consistent and will take a great selfie in pretty much any situation. So nothing else really to add apart from that. Now, video can be recorded in up to 4K at 60 frames per second, and it's still absolutely terrific, really good. It's stable, very detailed, so there's a very good chance you'll be happy with it. Newer iPhones have come a pretty darn long way in terms of video features though, for example ProRes recording and cinematic mode, but you know, unless you're making movies with your iPhone, you will rarely ever touch those. In general, video on here is absolutely still spectacular, and the vast majority of people are going to have a lot of trouble faulting it. In fact, something else you'll have trouble faulting is the performance. iPhones in recent years have just become amazing at remaining snappy and lag-free even once they turn a few years old, and the iPhone 11 is a perfect example, with the Apple A13 chipset and 4GB of RAM running everything flawlessly. Honestly, you could really go as far to say that day-to-day use speeds are pretty much indistinguishable from the newest iPhone 14 series. So whether you just use your phone for texting, calling, browsing the web and watching YouTube, or you play 3D games or do a lot of multitasking, rest assured it'll be a super pleasant experience. Now, when it comes to the longevity of the iPhone 11, meaning how long you'll get good use out of it for, well, it's likely there'll be around 3 to 4 years more of software updates, and then after that ends, it should still be usable for another couple of years after that before apps drop compatibility. But for the meantime, you'll still be able to use the phone for quite a while. So if you're someone who doesn't upgrade until they've run their phone into the ground after years of use, the iPhone 11 is actually still something to consider despite its age. And finally, let's cover the battery life, which will vary from device to device, but overall will still be quite decent if the battery is in good health and hasn't degraded from lots of use over the years. The iPhone 11 sports a 3110 mAh cell, which is pretty substantial, and it should still get you through the day with room to spare for light to moderate users, and maybe even heavy use if the battery has been newly replaced or is in good health. As with a lot of aspects, it's really nowhere near the amazing use and standby times that the latest iPhones can pull off, but it's still not bad by any means. Again, fine for the average person who isn't a power user. Again though, you are going to want to make sure that you're getting a battery that's in good health, ideally over 90%. And so that pretty much concludes my review of the iPhone 11 from a 2023 perspective. As I said at the start, it's a pretty reasonable deal at around $300 USD, quite a solid all-rounder, and will serve you well and good for the foreseeable future, especially in terms of cameras and performance. The only quote-unquote downfalls here are the lower res display, which isn't relevant for 99% of people, and sometimes the battery life, but again, if you replace the battery, or you find one with a battery in good health, then that's also not an issue. And if you do want a better display, the iPhone 11 Pro series are also available for a similar price. I'll have a video on them in 2023 coming soon. All in all, the specs have held up really darn well, and if you can find one at no more than $330, then you've found yourself a darn good deal. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure you drop me a like and subscribe to TechSpree for more reviews, insights, and the occasional unboxing. Thank you so much for watching. This is Tom with TechSpree, and I'll see you as always next time.